Boyfriend, Teenage Love. Written by Vella Jamar. Narrated by Deja, Nance. Chapter 19. On Monday morning, I started my job, which consisted of working with the small children. It probably would have been more enjoyable had I not been pregnant and tired first thing when I got to work in the morning. The best part I loved about the job was my paycheck and when it was time to go home. I tried keeping up with my coworkers and my condition, but it was tiresome. Marcus came over a couple of weeks later, noticed my tummy slightly bigger, and said, "You really are pregnant this time, aren't you?" I said, "No shit. You released in me on ovulation day, and yes, this time it is real." We stayed on the porch talking while he pondered and thought. Before he left, I asked him for $1 so I could buy some milk. To my utter surprise, he gave it to me. I was tired and told him I was going to go and lay down. He had to go and figure out his own feelings about my situation. I was dealing with enough. He called about a week later and claimed there were 4 other girls pregnant by him. He went on to say, "You better go down there and get an abortion. If you don't, I'm not going to have shit else to do with your ass. Black motherfucker!" I yelled, "After you specifically asked?" I calmed down and asked if he was going to pay for it, though I had no intention of considering it. I was trying to get a few more dollars out of him. The baby was going to need a lot of milk in the upcoming months. He responded, "You're working, aren't you?" I didn't say anything back. He said that when Charles' girlfriend got pregnant, all his mother said was that she was not going to be doing any babysitting. I had known her over the years. I wasn't intending to ask her to babysit. Neither one of us were ready to be parents, but the baby was growing inside of me day by day. That did it. I made up my mind as to what I was going to do about school. I was going to go as planned, with baby and all. I worked the entire 6 weeks and didn't bother calling Marcus, though it was hard. I concentrated on buying something the baby would need every paycheck I received. One day I left work and rushed to the dentist. My teeth were hurting really bad. The first thing they noticed was my belly and told me they could only clean my teeth. I would have to wait until after the baby was born to get anything else done. The reason being, they said, was that the radiation was not healthy for the baby. I walked home crying most of the way. I was going through all of those emotions for a Negro who asked me to get pregnant and then turned his back on me. I felt like a piece of shit. I began reading a name book, wondering what to name the child that was growing inside of me. At work, I did a lot of sleeping on the job. I dozed off one day a little too long in the hot sun on the lawn at Parchester Community Center during what was supposed to have been a 15-minute break. Everyone else in our crew had already resumed working by the time I woke up. One coworker named Retha, who had a baby when we were in the 8th or 9th grade, asked me if I was pregnant. "No," I lied. It was a secret between me, Marcus, and God. Nobody else was supposed to know yet. One day I threw up after I ate some of the free lunch that was delivered daily to the center. One guy who regularly worked at the center also asked, was I pregnant? No, I lied again. A few months later, while standing at the bus stop on my way to the doctor, he pulled up to the stoplight. He just looked at me and had a look on his face of I knew it. I couldn't say a word, not even hi. Just stood there and tried to hold my head up with some parts of dignity. My mother kept asking me if I was pregnant, and I wasn't quite ready for her to know yet, and so I responded, "You are always assuming that I'm pregnant," without ever answering. I then rushed up to my room so that she could stop looking. She had always asked over the years whenever I would swell up before I came on my menstruation, and I never was. Things would turn out a little different this time, but she would find out later. One day after swallowing my pride, I called Marcus's house. He had company and told me to hold on while he put some girl on the phone and prepped her to say, "What do you want?" Childish jerk. He got back on the phone and casually asked what I was doing. I quickly hung up. Judy, Trina, and the rest of their family saw my tummy rising and too asked was I with child. After their constant prying, I finally admitted to the fact. They were extra nice and loving after that. I should have told them a lot sooner. Diana was spending a lot of time with her boyfriend. I think Marcus and I were a bad influence on her. She called one day and joyfully shared that she was with child, her boyfriend's child. I was so happy. Wow, I wouldn't have to be pregnant alone. How wonderful, I thought. We did everything else together, so why not, I thought. I was a few months ahead of her, but that was okay. I was ecstatic. One day Marcus called. It had been a few weeks since our last phone conversation, and I had pretty much given up on him. He started talking shit about his mother having said girls aren't any good and that's all they want to do is trap you. He then asked what was I going to do. I told him I was due to start college in a few weeks. Me and my baby. I yelled and slammed down the phone in his face. I went over to Trina's house and told her what Marcus said when he called. She laughed, saying, trying to trap that nigga for what? He ain't got shit. I can understand if he had some money or something, which would give reason to trap his ass. She sure let it out in a more interesting perspective than I ever could have from my limited point of view. We laughed and changed the subject. That girl was tough. She had Snoopy and was finished with his father. Looking back, the boyfriends after him had to have something besides what they carried between their legs. That was just not going to get it with Trina. I went home and tried to go to sleep. I was certainly tired enough but could not doze off. I meditated about my situation. It was ruling my every thought as I kept trying to fall asleep. Words in a perfect poetic format kept floating inside my brain. I got up, turned on the light, and grabbed a piece of paper and a pencil. The words flowed out smoothly. It was my very first poem. It had been well over a year since I'd been in Mrs. Cohn's English class when she first read the beautiful poems, and I declared I could write poetry. I wrote. I thought it was love, from both our hearts. Now with the baby, he felt he must part. Our baby, oh how pretty, has a mother but no father. Oh what a pity. Now I've learned, but a little too late. Love can't be earned, not at this rate. Love, oh love, how beautiful it is, when in fact true love it 'tis. After I wrote it, I turned the light off and went fast asleep. Wow, that was easy and appeared to be the reason I could not go to sleep. As I began to be affected by different life situations, whether my own or others, I was able to construct a personalized poem from the facts. I'd make a card out of the poem and send it to the person if it was appropriate, or just make it a part of my poem collection. Poetry was destined to be a part of my life. Thanks so much to Mrs. Cohn. She'd made a big difference in my life, and I was really glad to have had her as an instructor. I don't know how word reached 12th Street that I was with child, but it was also going around that Marcus was in full denial. Word spread quickly. His niece's aunt, who was still totally infatuated with him, declared, "It is not Marcus's baby," as if she were there and knew. She still wanted him. I heard Raymond told a mutual friend that it is a test tube baby. He had a sense of humor which would lead to our special friendship years later. Olita couldn't even believe it. We had hung out more often that year than previous years, and I had never told her Marcus and I were seeing each other seriously. I didn't blame her for feeling as she did. She was not aware of the relationship. Samantha was telling people that Diana and I were pregnant by the same guy. Another neighbor saw me one day at the bus stop and exclaimed, "We are going to have a Tandy Jr.," and began giggling. Everybody, it seems, was talking. Our block had literally been turned into a cul-de-sac to pave way for some new condos. In order to get home, I had to take a chance of running into someone on 12th Street, none of whom I wanted to see due to having to walk halfway down to get home, or walk around to 10th Street and then come back up 11th Street where I lived, or climb over the fence into our backyard from the house behind us. A lot of times I just wanted to get home and opted to climb the fence and be done. I slept a lot that summer. I wrapped up my summer job and rested the little time I had left before school started. I went to orientation at the college and hurried back home to sleep. My mother asked me once again when she saw me jump the fence if I was pregnant. When I finally admitted it, she said it was not a good idea to hop over the fence with the baby inside. I hurried upstairs and was relieved that my secret was out. When I began college, I was among a lot of grown-ups, most of whom assumed I was a young married woman having a baby. The concern for my well-being was overwhelming and greatly appreciated. I loved college right away. I landed in the wrong English class again and was told to go take a placement test, which landed me in Mr. Bob Doer's class. He was just like Mrs. Cohn, enthusiastic about my writing. I still didn't get it. He told me to change my major to English writing, but I had my heart set on fashion design. I completed all of his assignments and happily went upstairs to learn about the fashion industry. It was a great experience. Marcus wandered over one evening and knocked on the door when he saw my mother's car missing from the driveway. I was surprised to see him since he promised it was over. We talked as he examined how big I'd grown since he had last saw me. He felt on my stomach and got a kick out of the movements his child made tumbling around inside. "Does it hurt?" he asked. I told him no. He minimally embraced, nothing like hugs in the past, and got around to what he had apparently been meditating about since none of his other demands worked. "Why don't you put the baby in your last name?" He inquired as if he had the right. "What's wrong with your last name?" I asked. "My parents were married when they had me," he said. I then questioned, was his dad married to those other women whom he fathered kids with, whom also carried his father's last name? I was bold. Since the last time he saw me after having talked to Trina's know-it-all self, he was at a loss for words and didn't know what to say after that. He had his daddy's last name, and his child was going to carry his last name. When he saw my mother's car pulling up in the driveway, he became anxious as to what she would say to him since finding out he'd impregnated me. Despite me trying to convince him to stay so we could finish the conversation, he yelled while I tried to hold him down by hanging on to his shirt. "Your mother is not going to kill me for getting you pregnant." He yelled and took off as fast as he had when he went flying out of my room that time he got caught. I went upstairs and went to bed. At the time, I was nearly 6 months into my pregnancy. When I was a younger teen with many things to do, I repeatedly made appointments with a gynecologist and kept breaking them at the last minute. He was hot and told me to stop coming to his office once I finally kept one of the appointments. He was the only gynecologist I knew. I had no inkling of where else to go, and so I called the office and asked for the other doctor who worked in the office. When I made it to my appointment and they pulled my chart, the note from the other doctor was in there, and the receptionist explained the situation to the new doctor and left it up to him whether he wanted to see me or not. Dr. Richard B. Lockett came into the room with the most beautiful smile and explained that I had already come to him late into the pregnancy and that I could not afford to miss any appointments at that point. He said he'd take me on as a patient if I promised to make all of my appointments. I agreed, and we had an instant doctor-patient friendship. He had a charming smile and was an overly concerned doctor who really cared. As promised, I kept every appointed visit. I wandered into the Richmond Public Library one afternoon after leaving school and was surprised to see Mr. Selak, who was so deep into reading his book. I passed by him several times without him looking up and noticing my tummy. His shaggy long hair drooped over his face, and thin-framed glasses gave him away. I crept upstairs and positioned myself behind a bookshelf so that he couldn't see my stomach. "Hello, Mr. Selak," I greeted. He looked up and said hi. He then asked if it was true that Diana was pregnant. I told him yes without mentioning the fact that I was too. We exchanged small talk and I allowed him to get back to his reading. I was not ready for him to know that I'd slipped on counting the days to my ovulation, which he had taught me a few years earlier. Diana, on the other hand, had already been up to Harriel's high, proudly showing off the fact that she was with child. She was happy to be carrying that boy's baby, and said the dean asked her if I too were pregnant. She said when she replied yes, she nodded her head and said, "Boy, you two sure believe in sticking together, don't you?" Thanksgiving came and my stomach looked as though it were going to burst. Each time Marcus came, he made sure my mother did not see him. He thought she was going to clobber him for planting his seed inside of me. He seemed concerned and was surprised that I was attending college. He'd never gotten to know me from the waist up, and in fact thought that I was illiterate. I don't know why. I hadn't mindlessly spent 13 years in school so I could be untaught. His presence lifted a burden off of my shoulder as he began to accept the fact that yes, this was all real. We never discussed what to name the baby. I think he knew of one name it would carry for sure, and that was his last name. The subject never came up again. Diana was working on her high school diploma during her pregnancy. She was also trying to keep up with her boyfriend who'd gone up to college an hour away. One day during my final month of pregnancy, she came to the doctor with me. While we were sitting down chatting, they called Mrs. Ream up to the window. We looked at each other and I whispered, "That's Marcus's sister-in-law. She had unfortunately lost a child, I believe through miscarriage is what she told Diana, who in turn told me when I came out of the examination room." We went to the bus stop to catch the bus back home. She informed Diana that she had heard Marcus had gotten someone pregnant. She also told her that Marcus had a close call with death at Treasure Island. Everybody thought he was crying wolf pretending to be sick so he could get out of a job assignment that he was sent there to do. That time it turned out he really was sick. She said they finally believed him when someone found him unconscious at the edge of the water. He later told me he was going to swim across all of that water to take himself to the doctor because no one believed he was really sick when he begged to go back to shore. Thank God for watching over us when we needed the most. He lied so much no one knew when to believe him. I kept in touch with Miss Kathy by phone. With that big mouth of hers, Diana went to her house and told her we were both with child. I wanted to bop her when we were out one day and saw her from a distance. I was trying to hide so Kathy wouldn't see me. Diana boldly went right up to her and informed her that I was near, not wanting her to see me in my tummy. I could no longer hide as she walked right up to me. As big as I was at that point, I tried to fasten up my coat so she couldn't really see me. It was useless. She wasn't disappointed like I thought she would be. I really looked up to her. She was an excellent role model who I had admired from the first day I met her. I told her, had she kept our club going, I wouldn't have gotten pregnant. She laughed and told me not to blame it on her. She invited us to a movie and we enjoyed hogging lots of pizza. When she dropped us off at home, I was reassured of our friendship, which ended up lasting for decades. We were on the quarter system at school and got off 3 weeks for winter break instead of the customary 2 weeks. I was glad because I was tired. I had carried 18 units my first quarter and was at school each day of the week. I would plan to schedule more carefully the next quarter. It was good to be able to rest in the morning. I had less than a month to go. My doctor wanted to see me on a weekly basis. Other than visits with him, I was free to rest. Christmas was coming and I did a little shopping. I couldn't wait to drop the load so I could get my cute little shape back. I bought a lot of fabric. I was fast becoming a clever fashion designer. Marcus came over a few more times before delivery. It was a relief to get that small amount of support out of him. I was really tired. He'd feel on my stomach asking if I was okay whenever he felt his child kicking. Christmas break came and went rather quickly. It was already time to go back to school. I had no intention of doing anything for the first 2 days except signing up for my classes and informing the instructors that I would be out for a few weeks after I had the baby, but that I would be back and not to drop me from my classes. I looked as though I was going to pop any minute. I signed up as planned on Monday and Tuesday. One lady whom I had classes with the previous quarter was so nervous at the sight of me walking down those stairs, she said, "Please go home and have that baby." I assured her I was only there to sign up for my classes and that I'd be back in a few weeks after I delivered. I went home and rested. Trina wanted to go out and asked me to babysit Snoopy. Sabrina must have had ESP that night and told Trina that she can't be leaving me there by myself and said I might go into labor. Trina went out anyway. I don't remember where Judy was. Maybe out with her boyfriend. Sabrina actually cut her date short and came home to relieve me of babysitting. She knew Trina wasn't coming home anytime soon. As soon as I went home at 2 o'clock in the morning, my stomach began aching. I may have been in labor while babysitting and didn't know it. It wouldn't stop. I went downstairs and informed my mother, who rushed me to Alta Bates Hospital, where it was determined that I was officially in labor. My doctor asked how far apart the contractions were when they called him at home. He had his mean partner whom he practiced with and happened to be at the hospital to do something to release most of the amniotic fluid. I hollered for dear life and he just looked at me as though I was crazy. He uttered something mean in reference to my screams under his ugly pink and black lips. I was glad that he wasn't my doctor. When Dr. Lockett arrived, he immediately strapped both my legs down so I wouldn't kick him, I imagine. I wanted to tell my mother to go home so she wouldn't see all of that yuck. But she wanted to stay and see everything. I guess she did because she sure didn't go anywhere. You'd think after having 8 of her own, she'd already seen it all. I guess it all looks different when you're not the one laying down giving birth. I didn't want her to see all of that gook, but she did, and that was that. The worst part was the labor pains. Breathing in and out helped alleviate the excruciating pains. I was ever so glad when he came out. That pain was 10 times worse than what I'd experienced when Marcus began entering my womb years earlier. I never want to experience it again, I promised my grandmother. She laughed and said, Now, Tandy, that first one is a mistake. Any more outside of marriage means you are waddling. Which she strongly recommended against. Her life was a living example. I didn't think to phone Marcus. A mutual neighbor, upon finding out, called his family. I guess they informed him. He weighed 9 pounds and 1 ounce. He tore me so bad, my doctor spent what seemed like hours stitching me back up. They forced me to get out of bed the next day and take a hot sitz bath. All I wanted to do was lay there and for them to leave me alone so that I could rest. My best friend Lorraine came to the hospital and brought me a robe that she'd been promising. Kathy came to visit and said she had no idea Tandy was my nickname. When she got to the receptionist, they said no one named Tandy was registered. She had to call my mother and ask her what my real name was so she could visit. It was such a joy to get a visit from her. Doc came in a few times to check on me to make sure I was okay before signing release papers for me to go home in a few days. The people in charge of filling out the birth certificate kept coming to ask if I had a name yet. No, I kept telling them each time they bugged me. One nurse temporarily named him Tyrone, since I hadn't the sense to name him yet. I took him home from the hospital with only a last name and promised I'd think of one and call it in. 2 days later, my mother finally picked one and I called it in to their relief. When I got home, I stayed downstairs in my mother's room for a couple of weeks. Boy, was she being ever nice. I don't remember when I'd last slept in her bed. It was almost 2 weeks before Marcus saw his son. I don't know why he was so hot damn hard-headed. The very night I went back upstairs to my room, I was dead asleep when he touched me. I didn't hear him open or close my room window. I did not hear him climb in. My mother had told him to keep his ass out. It wasn't until he touched me that I even knew he was there. He was excited and said, "Turn the light on so I can see him." I said, "No, I just got him to sleep." He reached down and kissed me long and hard, acting as though he hadn't seen me in ages. It was one of his good kisses. When his son began crying, I gave him to Marcus, turned on the light, and ran downstairs to make another bottle. When I gave him the bottle to feed his son, he said he had climbed up a few times the past couple of weeks and wondered what had happened when I was not in my room. He said he was scared to come and face my mother because he was not sure what her reaction to him was going to be. What had been done was done at that point. It was good to see him. I was beginning to think he'd forgotten us. He had the audacity to ask for sex. I told him no and that my doctor said to wait at least a month. He said his sister just had a baby and she and her husband didn't wait. I told him I didn't care what they did, I was going to follow my doctor's orders. He didn't push and delighted as he fed his son for the first time. After a couple of hours, I walked him downstairs and kissed him goodbye as I quietly closed the door. I stayed home a total of 2 weeks. I went back to school after my checkup with my ever-caring doctor's approval. He was absolutely for me going on to pursue my education. I loved him as a doctor. He was an absolute joy to have as a friend. I quickly caught up with what I missed while out having a baby. Marcus kept climbing his hard head up to my room, and I kept telling him my mother was going to whip his ass if he didn't quit. He kept asking me to go to a motel so we could have sex, and I kept telling him that the doctor said it wasn't time yet. I was under strict orders not to resume for at least a month. After the month was up, I was getting a pure kick out of him begging for my body. I thought it was cute seeing him get so mad while he begged. He was angry at my constant refusal. The next time I told him no, he stayed away an entire month. When he came back, I found a babysitter, and we went to the motel where I accidentally gave in. It wasn't as exciting as our first motel visit, but felt good to be in his arms. 3.5 months had elapsed since our son was born. It was business as usual. He joyously dripped, and I resumed keeping up with when it was time to get pregnant. I was not in any shape to have another baby. Once again, I had to get through school. One day during another motel visit, Marcus fell out of the blue sky and said, "I'm going to make you reach your climax." I didn't know what he was talking about or where he was going to make me reach to. Out of the 4 years we had been together, he had never said anything like that. I had heard the word in the air on occasion, but had never investigated its meaning. He didn't bother explaining. He undressed us as he had so many times the past 4 years, and laid us down and got on top as he had so many times prior. I figured we were going to make love as we had been accustomed. After 4 years, it was the same old, same old. I was waiting for him to do his sperm release and hurry up, out and off of me. I don't know why I was still accommodating him. He kept at it a little longer than he normally went, and was really starting to get on my nerves taking so long to hurry off. Suddenly, and without warning, my body began tingling. I didn't know what in the world was happening to me. Was that why he had taken so long? Trying to grasp and understand the new feeling at the same time, it kind of snuck up on me even though Marcus said he was going to take me there. I quickly pushed him off. I'd never experienced anything like it and thought I was going to have a heart attack. A good heart attack, mind you. He smiled, sat back, and observed me as I tried to understand what had just occurred to my body that he had been in love with for the past 4 years. I thought I was losing my mind. Warmly, he embraced me as if he had just done the most wonderful thing in the world to me and for me. He had. He probably felt guilty for not granting me the experience of ecstasy before then. When I finally gathered my senses, I asked him how did he know to make me feel like that. He said he'd read about it in a magazine, just like him to be reading about sex, his favorite subject. I hugged and knew for sure I was in love with him then. He had just taken me to the height of what sexual intercourse for a woman, not just the man as he had boldly proclaimed in the past, was supposed to be. I held him close. I did not want to let him go. I wanted him to take me there again, but was afraid my body or mind, for that matter, wouldn't be able to handle it so soon. We lay back down in the bed, and I wanted to remain in his arms forever. He was my baby, and after 4 years of him being my boyfriend, I was truly in love. As I got used to the tingly feeling, I finally understood after having sex with him 4 long years just what he had been feeling and just why he always wanted to drip. I finally felt what he had felt all of those clubhouse sessions. I couldn't believe he had been so selfish the past 4 years. Why hadn't he found out sooner that a girl could experience an orgasmic explosion and made me feel as good as he had been feeling? It would have made a huge difference from the beginning, how I felt about sex, and would definitely have made me fall in love with him a lot sooner. I found myself thinking about him often during the week. He claimed to have moved to San Francisco. I actually began looking forward to our lovemaking as I finally had good reason to. I had to discipline myself not to push him off at the launch of the climax, as I too was now groaning as he had been for the past 4 years. Hey, that took some getting used to. It was blissful to allow my body to enjoy the full explosion of ecstasy, which seemed too short once I was able to allow it to go all the way through. At the same time, it probably would have caused a heart attack if it had lasted any longer. God knew what he was doing when he designed us. I thought of all those times he looked forward to feeling good, while all I ever looked forward to was him hurrying to get up, out, and off. I thought, what a no-good dirty dog he was for years of holding back on making me feel good. I started demanding that he make me tingle each session before he dripped. I felt he had deprived me of Dr. Feelgood all of those clubhouse sessions and owed me to catch up. The end. This has been Boyfriend, Teenage Love, written by Vella Jamar, narrated by Deja, Nance.